Hello and welcome to an episode of Cabbie Conversations. I'm joined as always by James.
Hello.
And let me ask you something, James. We've both worked in the service industry. You in a pub, me in a supermarket. What's the most ridiculous thing you've been asked before by a customer, by a patron?
One of my favorites was it was a hot day. It was a Saturday, and so the customers come into the pub and they will often stay all day and just, especially in the summer, just drink Aperol all day long. This one woman was sitting in the garden, and she asked me, and we do have heater fans, but she wasn't near a heater fan, and they weren't on. And she says, can you turn down the heat? It's bloody boiling. And I was like, well, I can't really do much about the sun.
Oh my God.
She was sitting in the shade too, so there was nothing that I could really do apart. She had a drink, but it was just very funny.
Yeah, I have a lot of similar things where we're obviously not a massive shop, and we have to have these stacks of stuff that we're putting out, on the shop floor, because where the hell else are we going to put them? And I've had a few people being like, you're very in the way, like when you're putting stuff out, and it's just like, well, we do have to do it at some point. We have to put the stuff out at some point.
Would you like us just to leave it?
Yeah, we'll just leave it here, shall you? And you can just go all at it.
And you can come to the storeroom and we'll dispense there.
There was somebody who said that I should reduce a packet of chicken, because he was like, oh, it smells funny. And I was like, well, it doesn't. And if it smelled funny, we probably shouldn't sell it. So you're basically saying if you want, we should charge you less in case you get salmonella. It's like, but yeah. People are silly.
I mean, working in service is a great way to you meet all sorts in service, and it's a great way to kind of learn some people skills. Another one that I had was very strange was where I was behind the bar and a man and a woman came in and they said, oh, you must be Katie's boyfriend. And I was like, who's Katie? And I mean, I didn't have a girlfriend. I don't know anyone called Katie. But no, they were adamant. I was the right age for this girl called Katie, and Katie had a boyfriend at the landor. And I was like, I'm really sorry, I don't know anybody called Katie, especially do not have a girlfriend called Katie.
And then you're just lying.
Yeah, and then they got really upset about the fact that they were incorrect. I was not Katie's boyfriend. And because I look quite young, they then accused management of hiring somebody underage, even though I was not underage, because I wasn't Katie's boyfriend. It was very, very bizarre and ludicrous.
Well, it's like crazy people. That's happened a few times. That's happened once before, actually. Someone, it wasn't at work, but someone was just like, oh, are you Dan? I was like, oh, no. She's like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. And she was just like asking me for like a minute full. It's like, are you sure you're not Dan? Do you know Dan? It's like, I don't know anyone called Dan. It's just like, it's the kind of thing where you go to sleep and you're just like, what situation could that possibly be? It's like, either if she was meeting somebody she'd never met before, surely you'd know what they look like, and also you'd be aware of the possibility that you wouldn't get it right the first time, I don't know, why you wouldn't lie.
Well, maybe if it was a blind date and you were supposedly going on this blind date.
Yeah, but then if you said no, it's like, well, I'm not.
And imagine you were Dan for real, and she could be Katie or something, and and
I said, are you Katie?
Katie wasn't for you, go, oh no, I'm not Dan.
Yeah, but speaking of nothing related to our main topic, foreign aid. What a wacky thing that is. So essentially, here's the thing about foreign aid. I don't know if you know, but the idea of it is that we give money to other countries. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And some people like this and some people don't like this. So let me first of all hit you with some statistics, all you nerds out there that like numbers.
Got the numbers, got the numbers out.
So the UN sets out a target for every country that's a member, obviously, to aim for essentially aim to spend 0.7% of their gross national income on foreign aid. Now, the UK was hitting this target until very recently. They recently dropped it down to 0.5% because of economic struggle. But before that point, we were one of the highest contributors. We weren't the highest, but we were very far above, again, percentage-wise, obviously, not like literal figure-wise, but we were well above people like the US, even like Germany and stuff like that. So we don't contribute a small amount to foreign aid. It's worth putting that out there right from the get-go. And in terms of what we spend that money on, it's obviously quite hard to get the exact figures. But generally, the consensus is about 15% goes to humanitarian aid or crisis relief. About 36% of the money goes to multilateral organizations like the UN, Amnesty International, that sort of thing. And 64% goes to programs in the countries themselves. That's known as bilateral aid. So essentially, we give the money not necessarily to the government, but to organizations in the country themselves. And just our last little bit of information, the biggest recipients of foreign aid globally are Pakistan, Syria, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Afghanistan. So Asia and Africa, by and large, the biggest recipients of foreign aid. Correct me if I've said anything wrong there, James.
No, I think you hit all the nails on the head.
So let's ask first of all, what do you think people's main problem, or what are the perceptions of what is wrong with foreign aid?
Well, something that my dad said to me, because my dad is pretty anti quite a lot of foreign aid, and this took me back as a child. I was like, but you're helping people, and he says, well, okay, so you give some money to a charity, and the charity goes, great, we're going to give this money to a poor farmer. He's struggling to feed his family. We're going to give him a goat. So you give the goat to the farmer in say a sub-Saharan African country, and the goat basically eats all the man's crops, which is his livelihood. And then they have to eat the goat because there's nothing else to eat. That is quite an example of bad foreign aid. And if you'd asked the local community what they wanted, they might have gone, we really want a well, or we really want a school. And so often I think an issue with foreign aid is that it doesn't come from the ground up. It doesn't actually ask for the consensus of what is the local need. And it also is often, it can be quite short term. Like it can be, and I guess maybe not in a time of crisis, but in a time of non-crisis, it could be providing people with food and shoes and things. Although it feeds them and stuff, it doesn't solve long-term problems in the community, and it might not be the actual things that the community really need, address the needs of the community that will make them be empowered and able to stand eventually on an international stage.
Absolutely. I think the looking the long term is the important thing here, because in Africa, a lot of countries rely on foreign aid for actually the majority of their overall revenue. And so we can't, again, it's like you need to, when there's a crisis, or even just when they're developing countries, you do need to have a certain amount of surplus. You can't just you can't make progress for free. However, there is obviously, you can understand how when you have so much money, so much of your revenue comes from outside sources, that to try and wean them off it is quite difficult, and sort of adjusting your budget and your spending, when you're used to having this much income. If we just turned off the tap tomorrow, everything would just collapse. And obviously, in the past, a lot of the time, when we weren't so smart with our spending on foreign aid, it has a lot of the time gone to just the politicians and the lobbyists of other countries, and just basically made the rich richer and the poor poorer. So really, even if you are a proponent of foreign aid, you really need to question how you're spending it, because just throwing money at a wall or another country doesn't itself do anything. I think the grounds up thing you mentioned is the most important thing. You need to build communities, stabilize communities. You build, simple things. Well, not so simple things, but things that might seem simple to us. A lot of countries in Africa don't have like they don't have any internet access in a lot of the places. Having that, giving them that, building power lines, building internet wire cable and stuff, that would go a long way into providing jobs, first of all, and making so people in that community are connected, rather than just giving the money that would be spent on that to the government and hoping that they spend on the right things.
That is an interesting point, but there is some issues with introducing technologies such as the internet, electronic technologies into less economically developed communities. First of which is the source of energy. So these days, these countries normally don't have great access to oil, gas, coal, and so trying to like accrue those commodities would be very expensive, and also not sustainable for that community in order to power these computers, telephones, and so on and so forth. So I think when you are again looking to set up foreign aid, you need to also be thoughtful about how you're going to power it, and so often you need to look at more sustainable ways of setting up energy, which is something that the Bill Gates Foundation is looking to do. Another issue with technologies is that it actually can often create disparity within a less economically developed country. It can make the wealthy far more wealthy, but then the access is far more limited to say more people who live in much more rural areas. And because it's much harder to supply these power lines and so on and so forth to these people, the people who live in cities, and especially those who are more wealthy, will continue to gain knowledge and stuff, but the people who live out in the, say, desert will not.
No, I agree. The Wi-Fi was just a thing that I've read about a lot as a potential future investment. But obviously, you need to prioritize setting up stable food sources, stable water sources. Energy is a good point, because actually one of the benefits of being a developing country, and you can even argue one of the benefits of not having access to these fossil fuels, is that you can make it so, unlike in the Western world where we have built our economy and everything off of the idea that we have fossil fuels, and we're obviously now struggling with that to sort of disentangle ourselves from that we can help build communities in places like Africa, it from the ground up as being, you know, using renewable energy sources. But they'll never have to deal with the problems that we're dealing with now in terms of like trying to distance ourselves from fossil fuels if we basically create the mindset in them that is, you know, you have to deal with having a wind farm rather than a big fossil fuel power plant on your back door. But as I said, obviously, your priority first of all should be, you know, I don't need to tell you that however many people in Africa are living in poverty and they're starving. There's just the agriculture is just not up to snuff, and there's a few other reasons as well. But building that, establishing that core problem, the food sources and the water sources is obviously the primary concern.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it's not free, so that's where the foreign aid comes in. But again, just throwing the money at the government and hoping that they do it isn't a good idea. You have to spend it on communities and organizations, NGOs, programs in the country, like I said, bilateral foreign aid, independent, for the most part, organizations that hold their whole jobs to do that.
I would actually be more pro, say, multilateral donations instead of bilateral donations, because with multilateral donations, it will go to the various charities, NGOs, organizations that are relevant to the community and to the different plights of a less economically developed country. Bilateral foreign aid, which makes up 70% of foreign aid, goes from one country straight to another. And an issue with this it can be sort of as a diplomatic like strategy to gain a military ally, and also to like almost a form of neocolonialism to basically invest in certain industries which they deem as profitable, for in the end for the donating country's own self-interest, and not necessarily the interest of the recipient country, who could benefit from I guess from a more trickle down effect sort of loan with like smaller startups. I mean, a ground up sort of form of loan instead of a trickle down sense from the government.
I agree. The only thing I will say is, well, first of all, just because it's bilateral doesn't necessarily mean it's going to the government. I understand what you mean, because yeah, our government might say, well, we want to invest in Ethiopia's, I don't know, metal industry, you know, rather than building wells in poor communities. That's a form of bilateral aid. The thing with so we ourselves, our own government obviously is open to bias and you know, choosing what benefits us. Unfortunately, the UN and other multilateral organizations are also susceptible to this. And the more sort of, what's the word? Not filters, but the more steps there are in between, you know, us giving the money to people, a well being built, for example, the more steps there are in between that, the less of the initial money that gets put in there is by the end of it. Because obviously, if you give it to the UN, you have to pay people to do the admin and like monitor, and also that provides an opportunity for the money to go elsewhere, you know, not exactly where we want it to go. I understand, but yeah, I understand the principle and the fact that obviously the UN is more impartial than our own government. I suppose, yeah, we just have to be more aware as a society where our money is going, because I think a lot of people's perception of foreign aid, it certainly was mine when I was younger, was that we just give the money to the other countries like government. And I feel like if we were more critical and more aware of where our money goes, we could, you know, pressure our own government into say, you know, why aren't you giving money to build wells, improve agriculture, all these things that actually matter, and that it's the first step we have to take if we're actually invested in developing these countries from the ground up.
Definitely. I think probably the most famous example of foreign aid, and also where it went so badly wrong, is Live Aid. So Live Aid was in 1985, and Bob Geldof basically said, there's a famine going on in Ethiopia. People are dying and starving. We need to raise money and send them over money for food and stuff. What actually ended up happening with the $50 million that were raised from Live Aid was that Geldof handed over the money to someone called Mengistu, who was the dictator of Ethiopia at the time, and was deep in a civil war. Mengistu, they used the money to buy weapons off Russia to basically defeat his enemies and basically stronghold his dictatorship. And then also with because there are lots of different tribes within Ethiopia, used the food shortage to basically round up tribes and stick them in prisoner of war camps where all the aid food was. So it caused mass displacement and also mass violence of his own people.
Well, when you have like a nest egg, if you have some money stored away and you want to invest it, you don't just blindly throw it at the stock market without doing any research. There's such a thing as smart investments, and if we're going to spend money on these places, we need to know that it's going to the right places. Was Live Aid the one that Queen performed at?
Yeah, it was the one that Queen performed at. It's probably their greatest gig ever. But
very ironic.
And the intention of the Western countries involved was one of good intention, but Geldof didn't do his research properly, and NGOs were saying, don't send the money to this dictator. He will not use it in a I can't remember the word, in a beneficiary way for his people.
Ethical, I guess, yeah.
Ethical. So he is not the person to do it for. And I think something else we have to be careful of in the West when we're looking to give is kind of like the presentation in the front that charities promote. So do you remember Coney 2012?
All too well.
For those of you who don't know, Coney 2012 was a campaign to stop basically this guerrilla warlord called Joseph Kony, who had abducted a load of children and conscripted them into an army. And
warlord is a strong word. Sorry, I'll let you go
on. But the thing is that the information that they presented about Kony was just wildly inaccurate. First of all, that he was active in Uganda. He wasn't. He hadn't been active in Uganda for 6 years. He was in the Democratic Republic of Congo. They inflated the number of child abductions, and also the production value ended up costing with only about 100 staff really heavily involved in the process of Kony, ended up costing like 25% of all the aid, which ended up being about $8.8 million. For only 100 people, production and staff salary, that's an awful lot of money. And it was Kony. I remember it took off, like everyone in my class was talking about Kony, and suddenly overnight gone, scam.
Yeah, it's actually laughable when you look back at it. It's basically the equivalent if someone in Cornwall, someone's granddad fucking got on their garden and was like, I'm declaring Cornwall independent, and the news was just all over. He kidnapped some kids, but people were saying he was a threat to the world. He was going to be the next Bin Laden, and stuff like that. It was ridiculous. It was just some weirdo. But it's all about optics ultimately. It's and it's not, they obviously, a lot of the time, Kony 2012 is obviously an example where it was very shady. But people like Comic Relief say they do it, they do it because they have good intentions. They present this idea that Africa is this impoverished country to make us feel guilty and give them money. And that sort of, I can't help but feel like that has a somewhat of a psychological impact on us, where we have a feeling of, there's a feeling of white guilt. There's the feeling of, in a very small way, I feel like there's the feeling of white superiority, in the sense of we need to give them money because, obviously there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense that we're obviously economically a lot better off than people living in Africa. But I can't help but feel like it skews our perception of almost like a parental son relationship. Like we need to look after them, when really our aim should be, like I say, helping them sustain themselves. There's been a very bloody history when you look at how particularly countries like America have gone in with the guise of trying to help third world countries. And you could argue that it was just a front to get oil, but I think some people really did believe, a lot of people in the army believed that they were doing it for a good cause, they were helping people. But realistically, we were just intervening in a third world country where we had no business, and we made things worse. And to a lesser extent, that's what foreign aid can do. We can impart our own values rather than actually trying to help people.
Definitely. And something I kind of take issue with Comic Relief is the idea that celebrities go to these impoverished shanty towns and they kind of go, oh, it's terrible here, it's terrible here. And they act like a white savior. And also like that, they're there for 30 seconds. They kind of like go, oh, I love all these like young people. And then like they leave. And like the thing is, then we forget about them. We forget that these people are still impoverished. These people, until it comes back to Comic Relief again 2 years later. The thing is, and that kind of sits uneasily with me. And something, and like there is it. I mean, I guess what is good about Comic Relief is it is consistent. It is a consistent effort to keep generating the funds to help these communities. Although I don't know personally if Comic Relief continues to fund the same communities year on year on year, which is important, because you could, a one-time donation is not the same as integrated, like a system of aid. And is that system of aid, who runs the system of aid? Is it run by local people? Is it local needs, or is it not? These are all things that I sort of ask myself when I think of foreign aid, charitable foreign aid from not from like governments, but from us as like citizens. And what was I guess something also I want to touch on is volunteering, because often we go to like, it's not recommended if you volunteer, for example, that you should volunteer in an orphanage, because you go for maybe a month, maybe 3 months, you form attachments with these children, they're really, really cute, and then you leave and you kind of remember them as these cute small kids. But this happens over and over again to these children, and it basically causes attachment disorders in the children because they do not have reliable caregivers to give them affection, and that actually ends up doing more long-term damage than if, say, a local person who more local people worked at the orphanage and actually just like cared for them on a long-term basis.
Absolutely, I couldn't have put it better myself. I think perhaps this is a bit off topic, but I really think that people in our society how to put this, giving to charity and these sort of very small, for the most part, to be blunt, these ultimately very small contributions to very complicated problems. That this feeling you get when you do these things, it's almost like a drug. It's like it releases endorphins in your brain, like it's a chemical reaction. Like, maybe I'm getting too cerebral here, but essentially it's like you do these things pretty much just to sort of make yourself feel good and then move on. You know, like you say, you go, you teach these kids something, and obviously, like, these are objectively, like, for the most part, you're objectively doing a good thing. You know, you're helping somebody, and there's no reason why I should, like, I'm not judging anybody, but I'm saying if you really examine it, like, if you really, really want to help people, and like, you need to look at how to make their lives improved in the long run. You don't just want to be this sort of Superman character who comes in, saves them, quote unquote, and then leaves. Like, you have to, like building a school, for example, that's a lot more of a long-term investment. You know, it's a lot of work. First of all, it's not just paying £2 on your phone because you see comic relief. It shows that you really do care, and you're laying the groundwork for a long time to come. That's something you can do. So basically what I'm trying to say is, like, don't just, you should be selfless. You should try to be selfless, but try and look at it in a somewhat objective way if you really want to help people, not just in a way that's going to make you feel good about yourself.
No, I mean, one school, the Kettle Black, I have gone to a less than economically developed country, and I have volunteered there. But when I went, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't imposing this concept of being a white savior. I very much wanted to make sure that the organization that I volunteered with provided long-term support for these people and for the communities, and it was beneficial to the communities where I worked as a whole. I didn't want it to be a short-term situation. I wanted the part that I put in to be part of the greater scheme that overall would improve the lives of something greater than my own personal interaction.
Yeah, I should clarify. Like, I volunteered as well. I'm not saying you shouldn't volunteer, and even in short-term problems, like helping people deal with, like, the earthquake crisis in Haiti or something. You know, these things are obviously not long-term problems, but and helping in them is fine. I just mean when you go out of your way to volunteer or help somebody, you need to think about it on a level deeper than, well, this is going to make me feel good about myself. You need to really think about whether you're actually helping people and improving their lives.
Yeah, and I mean, one organization or cause that I'm really, really for is something called the Great Green Wall, if you've heard of it. So it's, for those who don't know, it's a plan to basically grow an 8,000 kilometer stretch of trees across the Sahel of Africa, which is basically the bottom of the Sahara, which is most prone to desertification due to climate change. So this band of trees is going to run from Senegal to Djibouti, and the idea of it is it will help change local weather systems to basically because basically what happens is the sun shines on the trees collect water from the groundwater, and then it travels out of the trees through the transpiration stream. This then generates more, water vapor. The more trees you have, collectively, the more water there is in the local areas, the more rainfall there is. So this means that this long-term improves soil fertility. It improves the amount of water. It means that the water table is higher in the earth instead of lower, so it's easier to access water through wells. It has a substantial effect, positive effect on local people. It empowers local people to learn about their environment and to take care of their environment. And it is also overall beneficial for the whole of the planet on a climate, whilst we're in a climate crisis. So this is very much a sustainable long-term cause I'm for.
Yeah, me too.
but it is but I think if you want to invest in, but basically my message is aid is very important, but as a personal, on like a personal level, if you choose to invest in aid, if you choose to volunteer, you must think of the consequences of your actions in regards to the people who you hope to better. You have to think about it in a long-term way, is what I think is really important to be mindful of.
Absolutely right. We went a little bit off topic, but I'm not upset about that. Going back to foreign aid, what do you think? So we just said our opinion on, you know, why we think we should be smart with our spending on foreign aid. But what do you think about the people who think that the fact that we're spending so much, because it's not, again, like I said at the beginning, it's not a small amount of money. We spend more on foreign aid than a lot of other sectors of our own domestic spending. So what do you think about the people who say, well, we're dealing with all these problems domestically? You know, you hear on the news every week, like the NHS isn't getting enough money, police aren't getting enough money, prisons, blah, blah, blah. Why is it that we're spending all this money on other countries? What do you say to that point of view?
I think it's a very fair argument to an extent, because there are so many negative connotations with foreign aid that we have discussed, such as corruption and neocolonialism and so on and so forth. So I think it is a very worthy argument. However, I think also and there are often people who in society do need more attention. And it's something I sort of struggle with, I guess, not through the government, but with comic relief, how they focus, they do some domestic projects, but I feel there isn't enough focus on that. But anyway,
That's fair.
I do think that but at the same time, something say such as the NHS or such as education, there's always going to be a need for more investment. That's the thing. There's no, like, no matter which way you slice the budget, whether you're a Tory or you're a Labour or, you know, a socialist or, you know, like an extremely right wing, there is always going to be, there's never going to be enough money to perfectly meet the needs of healthcare, education, social care, so on and so forth. It will never be completely perfect. It can always be improved. But foreign aid kind of allows, I guess, more progress to be made in another less economically developed country a lot faster.
Yeah.
Which is a benefit, and if it promotes growth globally, that can then also help us in the long run.
I think that's the thing for me. It's that I completely understand. I mean, if I was like a nurse or a homeless person in London, like I would be like, well, why can't I get 16 billion or whatever? But from a if you step back and look at yourself not as a British citizen but as a human being, you know, we have the opportunity where we earn a lot, we make a lot of money as a country, and I think that in principle, at least, when we develop as a people, we should do it well as a people. Like, we shouldn't just have these countries like the UK and the US, light years, not light years, millions of years ahead of everybody else, just because we got lucky, basically. You know, there's no reason why we shouldn't be trying to, again, not just throw money at them, but lift everyone else up, trying to create a global community where we all have something to offer and we're all doing not perfect but decent. And this is the thing, like you say, there's no reason why we can't have both, you know, spending on foreign aid and improve the spending of our own systems. We know we also know what happens when the government promises, you know, there's the classic red bus slogan. If we suddenly cut our foreign aid budget down to zero, I wonder where that money would go. You really have to think about these things. I think realistically, it would go to the big black hole, which is the debt, you know, not helping anybody.
Yeah.
And again, it's I understand obviously it doesn't make you a selfish person. It's a fairly reasonable response, but I think, yeah, I would urge you to think about these problems in a global way. Try not to look at it as a British, you know, I guess the way I'm trying to say, imagine if someone down the street from you had no source of water and they were still using like non-electronic means of agriculture. If you think about it like that, you know, geographical location really shouldn't matter in terms of, you see people struggling, really struggling, more so than they are in like in our own country, it has to be said, like, and from a fundamental level, because, you know, we have a lot of people in poverty in our own country, obviously, but there's nowhere in the country where you can't access water. You know, there's nowhere in the country where basically there's a good chance you'll starve to death. So if you look at it like that, for me, from that perspective, there's no reason why we shouldn't try and help these people.
I mean, yes, I agree. I think you've said it better than I am. Food poverty, homelessness, even access to internet in the UK is not equal by any stretch of the imagination. However, proportionally, we are far better off as a nation than an impoverished country in, say, sub-Saharan Africa or in the Middle East. And it's all about that proportion. And so it's like you said, what percentage was it of our GDP? Was it 0.5 at the
It was
moment?
0.7 and now it's 0.5.
So and you know, that is a pretty, although it ends up being quite a large amount of money, it is still a pretty small fraction of our total like national spending to go and make a huge difference in another country, especially because our currency is so valuable in comparison to, say, theirs. So if you look at it from cross currencies, the pound has a lot more spending value, so we can make a huge difference in another country.
I mean, if you've ever been unfortunate enough, like myself, to have to go on the tax website to try and sort out your own tax, you might be able to look at, there's a page that lets you look at basically what the government spends your tax on. If I recall, the top one is healthcare, and then it's welfare and stuff like that. But the point is, foreign aid is not even in the top 5. You know, paying off the country's debt is even above that. So I would, yeah, try and look at the amount of money we spend as a literal figure. Try and look at it in the grand scheme of things. Because, you know, on a national level, that's not a huge amount of money. Again, like we say, as you say, especially because our currency is more valuable to them than it is for us. So we can afford to, we can do a lot more good with that money by giving it to other people. Was there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered all of my, I think we covered all of my points, but yeah, I'd say just think carefully about where you choose to donate, and that foreign aid is a complicated mess.
Yeah, but as quick sidetrack to the whole charities thing, if you are going to donate to a charity, do some research into the charity itself before you do. There's been plenty of cases. I mean, I actually looked it up. Not this is necessarily like makes them corrupt or anything, but what the chief executive of Comic Relief has a salary of 200 grand. So, you know, there's been classic cases of charities, just the people at the top getting stupid amounts of money, paying out of the money that they get from you, spending the money on stupid things that no one asked for. So yeah, be conscientious. Don't just blindly throw money at things to make yourself feel better. All right. Thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.